Have you guys ever struggled with this? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so we can afford to get Mike some beard oil. You guys have probably had areas where maybe what we taught you got pretty close to all right, but then it comes down to the detailed radiuses, the sharp edges. Everybody starts blocking this thing out and they think they know how to spread it, when in fact you need to dissect what shape it is that you're actually working at a time and establish those body lines before trying to do all of the crucial curvatures, body lines, all that stuff. Typically when we're thinking about this curvature on a well lip, you would try to combat that shape with spreading filler with going upward. And the problem with that is you're creating all kinds of inconsistencies. And if your body work, and when I say body work, I'm talking about the section here on the flat, the main part of your shape. I always go to the main part of the car in between the wheel wells and or big flat sections before I jump into this. And that's because you have to establish a baseline that is flat. You guys have seen me use the pencil trick, and every time we use it, we're always going back over what is good. People have asked me, are you going to have a problem with the pencil line, with the body filler adhering to the pencil line? Pencils, graphite, that's the same thing of what the guide coat is made of. We end up removing it, and when we're talking about a pencil line, it's not going to affect our adhesion. But as we work this down, a lot of guys will sit there and they'll fold the sandpaper into this curvature and they'll sit there and work it. But what ends up happening is you end up digging this trench right in this area, and then you think you're done, you kind of sort of feather it out, you prime the car, and you realize that you have one massive trench here that you could put an alligator in to go around your moat. What you want to do is establish this and then spread in the direction that makes sense. Now let's just pretend if we're dissecting the shapes here, we're going to use this block as, we'll call it an extension of this body. If we call this panel from this point to this point A, the curvature in the center is B, and this flat being C, again pretending this is sheet metal coming off, you're going to end up body working A and C, getting them nice and flat, and that way you can come in with the spreader and put it between the two curvatures, or the two flats rather, to create that shape. Always trying to think about what shape it is you're trying to create, and you might be using some tools that you have laying around the shop. Now I know I've always talked about acrylic blocks and I kind of bash a little bit on Durablocks. However, Durablocks are super handy, they're the most easy to hold, and as long as you're using them with a light touch. Again, if our bodywork's done and you're just trying to create a sweep, if you go longwise with a Durablock, it's going to create a straighter line than if you're sitting here and chopping at it very small sections, because then you're going to cause ripples, and you might as well be doing this with a DA. At that point, you can then establish what this curvature should be, and we're always trying to think about how much filler we have left on the car. And I know what you guys are seeing here is a bare metal spot, and this is just a demonstration. This is not roughed in all the way to this point yet. We're going to come back in and put another skim on this to get this flat. There's a small low here. So if you left this to where you barely had any of the primer below showing, you are then staying a little bit on the fat side. That way, when you come in and you block this radius and you feather it out, you can then come in and put your pencil line above or below or around. Before we use the pencil to mark our low, now we're using our pencil to verify that we have not removed the material that we already know we've perfected. You are trying to use such a light touch that the pencil line remains there. That way, when you switch to either a bigger next level block or a linear block or any of those blocks that have a nice flat acrylic edge, you can then come back in and do all of your finish work going just a hair past, removing that little bit of fatness and then feathering it into this radius to create one perfect sweeping shape. Then once you get everything blocked out and close, you can come back, and depending on how good your bodywork is, yada yada, you can then verify what areas are not hitting. You can then circle those just beyond the area that you need to fill, come back in, and when you actually go do the second spread, everything in this radius, you already know that it cleaned up, you know that it's good. So as long as your fingers in the spread are not pressing down super hard in this area that's low, you can then come back through and gradually fill this in either direction, making sure you don't have any voids. Obviously, if you have bigger voids, you have a lot bigger of an area with damage. And you want to do nice smooth spreads. One, it's easier to sand. Two, it'll feather out. And that way you can come in and just ever so slightly dial this in. Again, I don't sit here and keep going until I see hints of primer until the very end. We're trying to keep the mill thickness to a minimum. And a lot of people will say, man, there's an excessive amount of filler on this car. We're going for a reflection, and when we're using a light source and or something in your shop and you're looking at it in the reflection of the car, we are trying for no deflection on the panel and in between other panels. And the only way that we can achieve that is to then come through and skim coat the entire car to create that one shape. If you are treating your car where you're doing the body work on this panel and you have the doors off and the fenders off, you're not going to achieve this. If we go back to, like, say, a Coach Smith or a metal shaper who's creating these panels from scratch, it takes a very, very good metal shaper to be able to make that panel to where we're talking about mill thicknesses. We're talking about sheets of paper thick that just make ever so slightly. It takes a sheen, whether you spray primer or whether you have wet sanded it, to be able to bounce around and then get a glimpse of what that light source does. If you have an area, like let's say you're looking at a long light, a tube light, and that tube light comes right here and you see it do a wave, you know where that wave is going to be either a low or a high in that area, and that's the area you can attack. It's very crucial that you finesse these areas in and use the grits appropriate to cut this down, because you wouldn't want to use 320 grit to cut your filler down because it's just gliding over the mountain range of filler. You need something that's going to cut this flat. That goes for everything in the primer stage, the body filler stage, and after clear coat. You always have to go back to a grit that's going to be aggressive enough that cuts it flat. If you have an area in this section next to a fender lip that, obviously this is the back wheel and it's welded, but maybe you're on a front fender lip and you can move and tweak that fender. Sometimes all it takes is a quick little tweak to eliminate a whole bunch of filler. Maybe it's a 1/16 you save in that area, or the heartache of trying to get this flat. The best way to verify that is with a straight edge. And when I'm talking about creating one shape front to rear, obviously a spline is going to help you only in this section. But if we're talking about you just had a very specialty car that was metal shaped from scratch, how do you verify if the car needs to be skim coated or not? You're going to be using a piece of steel, whether it be strap steel for a curve, maybe it's 1/2 inch flat bar, 1 inch wide to create that sweep, or maybe it's a flat car like this Lincoln and you use C-channel, angle iron, something that you can put 2 edges, maybe it's a round bar, and you can put it for the span of your flat area to verify if this needs to be moved or adjusted. Because a lot of times, maybe you can cut a quarter and move something just a little bit, and it just saves you a ton of either shrinking, maybe it's too high, or maybe it's too low and you have to bring things out. Maybe you need to adjust your door. You're checking and verifying everything from one end to the other. If you guys want to know more about the pencil trick, check out this video. If it doesn't pop up, look in the description. We will put the link in there for you.